Well, here we are at the beginning of May, and it seems like every conversation that we have now, in fact, I think 3 times already this morning, the first thing that was said to me by someone else, "Hey, how's it going? Oh, how many weeks do you have left?" And I don't think they're saying it as if, "Oh, you guys aren't gone yet? Wait a minute, I thought that was last month." No, I'm sure that's not what they meant, right? Right? No, okay, good. But it's true. Our time with you as your pastors is coming to a close. After this Sunday, there will be 4 Sundays left that we'll be with you in worship and preaching and sharing our life together as a congregation. And just a few weeks after that, so like June 4th, our last Sunday, and just 3 weeks after that, the new pastor, Tim McTell, he will be here with a new beginning with you. And so for our family and for his family and for this church family, we are in this time of transition, this time of letting go and anticipating what is to come. And these kinds of transitions, they are always complex. In fact, so much so that they give us guides as pastors. Here's how you depart faithfully from a congregation, and this is how you start in a new pastor. And Pastor Tim's got that same list and how he starts with a new beginning. And one of the responsibilities of the departing pastor, other than turning in their keys eventually, and a few passwords, is to help prepare the congregation to receive a new pastor and to go faithfully through this kind of transition. And so I was thinking about that. How do we actually do that? So much of it's administrative and behind the scenes and things you'll never see or have to worry about. But there are other kinds of transitions that happen in the midst of this, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And I remember just last week that back in August of 2018, Ann and I preached a 3-week series about transitions. You may or may not remember that series. I should give a quiz to see, get bonus points. Who knows? But we used the book of Ruth from the Old Testament, and we used a book written by William Bridges that's called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. And so I thought, not to repreach the same sermons again, but to take that same material and to create a new series based on that same wisdom. And I really do encourage you to get a copy of this book, Transitions, for yourself. There's so much wisdom and insight. It's been around for like 40 years. It's gotten through multiple editions. There's whole consulting companies working with this. It's such just every single aspect of our life, we go through changes and transitions all of the time, and we just don't do them well or intentionally or with purpose. And this is one of my top 5 books for navigating life. It's just a beautiful insight to it. And the reason that I hope you'll take this book and read it, or at least pay attention to most of these sermons, is because change does happen all the time. Change happens. Sometimes we initiate it, sometimes it happens to us. I mean, every day we get older, our children get older. We have transitions today, changes today as high school graduates finish high school and go off to a new adventure in college and in trade schools and in the military and all the things that we do after high school. Change happens. But to truly transition, we almost never do the inner work that's needed to make the changes that happen in our life actually help us grow and help us change as well. Change happens, but we so often just get stuck in the past. I remember when I was in high school, the people we made fun of were the folks who had graduated 3 or 4 years before, but were still coming back, like they can't let go of high school, like that was the best moment of their lives, and they're only 20 years old and that they're still hanging around. Get a life. That's what we'd say then. I'm more sympathetic now. But change happens, but we don't always transition. This is how William Bridges explains it. Our society talks a lot about change, but it seldom deals with transition. Change is your move to a new city, your shift to a new job. It's the birth of a new baby. It's the death of your father. It's a switch from an old health plan to a new one, the replacement of your manager by a new one. It's the acquisition that your company just made. In other words, change is situational. Change is big and small. We can point to them. They're external to us. But transition, on the other hand, he says, is psychological. And I would say it's also emotional and mental and spiritual as well. Transition is not those events. Rather, it's the inner reorientation that you have to go through in order to incorporate any of these changes into your life. Change happens all the time, but without the work of transition, we never grow as people, regardless of the circumstances changing all around us. And so the point of this book and what it's pointing us to is helping us understand how we grow as people as we navigate all of these changes. And so the heart of Bridges' book is just these three phases. He kind of introduces the idea of transition versus change and how we understand how that works in our life. But then he says it's actually kind of three phases that you go through, and they overlap, and they take different amounts of time and different circumstances. But there is always this, the heart of his book, these three phases: an ending, or a losing, or a letting go. And then there's what he calls the neutral zone. I call that the in-between time, or the middle ground. And then there is a new beginning. And we're always excited about the new beginning part, but we don't actually experience a new beginning if you're not willing to go through those other phases of transition. And regardless of where you find yourself in life, this threefold process of disorientation and reorientation, it really is a key turning point of growth. So one of the metaphors that Bridges uses in helping us understand how this works is actually home renovation. Not building a new home, but home renovation. If you're redoing your kitchen, you start by undoing the old kitchen. You can't have a new kitchen without the demolition. You have to undertake that same process, making an ending to what used to be, taking out the counters and the countertops and the flooring. But then there's a time when it isn't the old way anymore, and yet it's not the new way either. This in-between time when your kitchen is a folding table, maybe in a side hallway or out in the garage, where your life isn't what it's going to be, but it's not what it was. You're sort of looking forward to what will come, and yet you're washing dishes out in the wash sink next to the washing machine. It's this not now, but not yet. And it can be a very confusing time. You have to make temporary arrangements for dealing with this interim time, this in-between time. And it is kind of, and we'll talk about this next week, the way that is kind of disorienting in this now and not yet. I always think about my cats, our cats, every time we move something in the house. I don't know if you have cats, but cats don't like change. And so every time we move a piece of furniture, they glare at us for 3 or 4 days. And as you can imagine now, with boxes that are being packed and the kind of craziness in our home, the cats have asked if anybody else would like to offer some stability, right? No, they still love us. But you can kind of see how that is an in-between time. But then comes that moment when the project's completed and you've experienced this joy of a new beginning. But with just like in life, this kind of demolition metaphor, remodel metaphor, there's no shortcuts. You don't get to the new without first letting go of the old and enduring that time in between. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing in this series, because I don't want us to miss the opportunity to make a healthy transition and to learn and grow as people and as a congregation. And so today we begin with the end. T.S. Eliot wrote this: what we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a new beginning. The end is where we start from. Usually when we think about a book, we look at it's got a beginning and a middle and the end. They lived happily ever after. But Bridges points out in life, it's always the opposite. It always begins with an ending, and then it leads to a new beginning. He writes this: considering that we have to deal with endings all of our life, most of us handle them poorly. This is in part because we misunderstand them and take them either too seriously or not seriously enough. We take them too seriously by confusing endings with finality. We take them too seriously by thinking that that's it, it's over, it's finished. We see them as something without a sequel, forgetting that they're just the first phase of a transition process and a precondition for self-renewal. Endings are really a beginning. At the same time, we fail to take them seriously enough because they do scare us. And it does involve grief and hard things, and so we try to avoid them. We'd rather just skip to the new beginning, but you suddenly realize you never really left the past behind, and you never actually experienced that new beginning. So endings are so important. He writes, we might say, I don't want to talk about the past. I'm interested in the present. I'm interested in the future. We prefer just to move on. Don't cry over spilt milk. What's done is done. Let bygones be bygones. But how can we come to understand that our so-called present is a past that we haven't let go of yet? Endings must be dealt with if we're going to move on to whatever comes next in our lives. The new growth cannot take root on ground still covered with the old habits and attitudes and outlooks, because endings are the clearing process. That was the other metaphor he used of replanting a garden. And the first thing is to clear the old and to plow the ground. As I thought about this book, this is why we turn to the book of Ruth, because it's a very beautiful story, one of the most beautiful in the Old Testament. It's one that we're familiar with. We looked at it last year in the Bible year as we went through all of the scriptures. And really, this book begins with a long series of endings. You know this story well, probably, but the story unfolds quickly just in chapter 1. Just the first few verses, we're introduced to a man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their two sons Mahlon and Chilion, and they live in Bethlehem, but there's a famine in Bethlehem. And so the whole family moves across the Dead Sea to the land of Moab to the east. So now they're in a foreign land, and they settle there. But we're told very quickly that Elimelech dies, and Naomi is left as a widow, but she still has her two sons. And while they're there, she has her two sons marry local women, two Moabite women. One is Orpah, and the other is Ruth. But then we're told that then both her sons die. You see, change after change after change. Both her sons die, and so now just these three women are left, Naomi and her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Well, we find out that Naomi has received word that the famine back home has ended, and she has nothing for her in Moab anymore with her husband and sons who have died, and so she makes her way home, gets on the road. And her two daughters-in-law, they start to go with her, but she stops them, and she says this, "Go and turn back, each of you, to the household of your mother. Find security. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb that they would be husbands for you? No, my daughters, this is more bitter for me than for you." And then they wept. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and left, but Ruth stayed with her. And Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back, go after your sister-in-law." But Ruth says this, and this is, if you know anything from Ruth, you know this speech that Ruth gives to Naomi. She says, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me and more, if even death separates me from you." Changes are happening again throughout this entire story. These changes, they're situational. The famine, the move to a new place, the marriages, the death, and finally this return home. But where do we find the transition in the midst of all of this change? Certainly there's no denial of the situation. They know the prospects that they're facing, and they do have this tight bond and great love and affection for one another. They realize their future can't be like their past, but two of the three people in this story simply go back to where they came from. Facing the reality, letting go is difficult. Orpah returns home, but Naomi is also returning home to Bethlehem. But it's Ruth who makes a different kind of ending. She stays with Naomi, and that is going to be her new beginning. But in order to do that, she has to let go of everything that gave her her identity. And we hear it in that speech she just gave. She's letting go of her home country. She's letting go of her mother and her father's household. She's letting go of her old religion, letting go of the prospects of a Moabite husband, and is willing to go and be a foreigner in a strange land to her. She's letting go of everything that had previously provided her identity. And you know that has to be disorienting, to disengage in that way from your place of origin. But she's determined that this is a new beginning. It's an intentional choice that she's making. The transition requires awareness of what changes are happening, and an acceptance of those, and an intention to let go of what needs to be let go of so a new beginning can be experienced. She took these changes seriously enough to realize that everything would be different. Her future is not yet unfolded, but she makes an ending with her life as she knows it. She doesn't take the changes so seriously as to despair. And you hear the speech, you're inspired by it, you're moved by her commitment to Naomi and her faithfulness to her. And you know she's losing a lot in the midst of that, but it's not despair. There's a note of resolve and of hopefulness that Naomi's home will be hers, that her people will be hers, that Naomi's God will be hers. These endings are not an end. They're just the first steps to a new beginning. So what can we learn for our own circumstances? Certainly, we all have changes in our own life, and I hope that you can take some of these things and apply them to different things you're going through. But I was thinking for Ann and I, for this church family in the midst of this pastoral transition, and just the situation, the external change that is happening, that's before us. And there may be a range of emotions at the prospect of that. We've been living with it for a few months now since we announced on February 5th, and just a couple of weeks ago learning about Pastor Tim coming. And there are positive emotions, there's negative emotions, the reality of saying goodbye to the Fuquays and the prospects of welcoming with open arms the MacTells. And speaking only for our family, our emotions are mixed and conflicting. We get asked a lot, how are you feeling about this? Are you really excited? And we are excited, but we're also grieving. And we're also sad. Those things can coexist at the same time. You can be really happy and really sad all at the same time, and we are. We grieve leaving this church. We grieve leaving this community. We've loved having a place for Michael to go to middle school and to high school, and to have our family here for 7 years has been an amazing blessing. All of you mean so much to us as well. We've loved our friendships and the relationships that we've had. We genuinely love you. It's hard to say goodbye. So much so that people are, I'm sure I'll be through Champaign-Urbana sometime. We'll stop, we'll say hello. I'm like, probably not, that's fine. We get it, but we want to say something that keeps us connected so that goodbyes don't have to be goodbyes. Although a lot of people say they go to Chicago, and we'll take them up on that part. And yet we have so much that we're looking forward to, even as we're sad about leaving. We do have a new adventure in front of us. Exciting opportunities for Michael going to college, and for us moving to a state we've never lived in before. And you know, we're actually really excited for you all about having Pastor Tim come. We had a chance to meet him this week and to spend some time with him. And he and his wife coming to Ocala first, he just brings so much experience as a pastor of large churches. He's very, very grounded. As we talked to him, we were just amazed. He just has this humble, down-to-earth spirit that's so refreshing. He's a deep listener. He works collaboratively. He's just an amazing fit for this congregation. And we're excited for you because you're going to get to experience his leadership and his presence with you. All of those emotions are real. They're a part of this experience of change and transition. They're all experienced at the same time. But the reality is, to make a healthy transition, we first must make an ending. And we'll be able to make that ending in some very specific ways. And the reception that we'll have on May 21st, our last Sunday on June 4th, we'll get to celebrate Holy Communion. And some of those external things, there's some finality to that are important to mark. But we also must do the internal work of making an ending. And so what does that look like? In this case, but really in all endings, what does it look like to actually make an ending, to clear the ground? And the first is to celebrate good things, to allow yourself to be grateful. We are grateful, and we celebrate the wonderful things that have happened over these last 7 years together. We allow ourselves to feel that gratitude and the grief of having to let go of it. But the let go part is really important, because soon our time as your pastors will be in the past. And we'll continue to be grateful for that time, but it has to stay in the past. One of the hardest things for us is to keep carrying the past into the future, particularly in the church. Most of us have a particular time or place, sometime in the past of a church, either this one or another one we've been in, and pastors do the same for the different churches we served, when it's like this moment, this is when it was perfect and right, and this is what it should be, and it isn't that way anymore, and I'm still grieving it, and I've never really let that go. But to make a transition, we have to let go. To not hold on to the way that Ann and I have done things, or the gifts we offered as your pastors, to celebrate what we could offer here as your pastors, to be appreciative of it. But if you hold on to that, your hands won't be open to receive all the wonderful gifts that Pastor Tim will bring. And the same goes for grievances that you may have. Sometimes there's hard feelings and unresolved things when there's transitions like that, because Ann and I, we've made mistakes. We've gotten things wrong every once in a while, right? I know that we've hurt feelings unintentionally, but I know we've hurt feelings because we've had to work that out with some different people. We've disappointed others. We've had people express their frustration and their anger with us, and I don't mind saying that out loud because every pastor I've ever talked to in every church I've ever been in and every church that anybody's ever been in, it's always that mix. There's good things and there's hard things. But to make a healthy transition, you have to let go of those hard things as well. To let the past be the past, not to carry any baggage or any wounds into a new future with Pastor Tim. Because new growth cannot take root on ground that's still covered with old habits and attitudes and grievances. These endings, the work that we're doing now in transition, is clearing the ground. To let go and to make a fresh start with a heart of peace. So remember, endings are only the beginning. And Anna and I will cry half a dozen times a week for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And we'll give hugs, and we'll give our goodbyes, and we'll celebrate all that is good, and we'll hopefully resolve that which has not been resolved, and then we'll be in a place to let go. That's what it takes to allow God to change us, to allow us to grow as people, to allow this church to grow more faithful and closer to God's mission that He has given to us.